The Crusades were a series of massive wars and religious conflicts initiated, supported, and promoted by the Latin Christian Church during the Middle Ages, specifically from the year 1095 to 1291. Their goal? To reclaim the Holy Land, Jerusalem and the surrounding regions, which at that time were under the control of various Muslim rulers and armies. Thousands of people took an oath to travel to Jerusalem and fight in the name of Christianity. They wore a cross on their garments, earning them the name Crusaders or Crux Ignatus, soldiers of the cross. The First Crusade began in 1096, following the call of Pope Urban II at the Council of Clermont in 1095. His message urged European Christians to protect their fellow believers in the Middle East and reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim rule, a call that sparked a massive movement of crusaders marching from Europe to the Holy Land. Over the next 2 centuries, multiple crusades were launched, involving military campaigns, diplomatic treaties, and brutal clashes between Christian and Muslim forces. Among the most famous were the Second Crusade, 1147 to 1149, led by King Louis VII of France and Emperor Conrad III of Germany; the Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192, led by King Richard I of England, also known as Richard the Lionheart; and the Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204, which shockingly shifted its target from the Middle East to Constantinople. Several other crusades followed between 1095 and 1291, each with different ambitions and outcomes. In this video, we'll dive deep into the true history behind the Crusades, what motivated them, what their goals were, and how one of the most significant wars in history finally came to an end. After the Muslim armies defeated the Byzantine Empire at the Battle of Yarmouk in the year 636, Jerusalem fell under the control of the Umayyad, Abbasid, and Fatimid caliphates. During this period, political relations, trade, and religious tolerance between the Arab world and Christian Europe fluctuated, until tensions reached a breaking point in 1072. That year, the Fatimids lost control of Palestine to the rapidly expanding Seljuk Turks, whose campaigns across the Middle East reshaped the region's balance of power. The Seljuks became notorious for harassing Christian merchants and pilgrims along the borders of Palestine, incidents that eventually fueled anger and anxiety across Western Europe. Many came to believe that a holy war was necessary, a war in which European Christians would reclaim Jerusalem from Islamic control. However, while religion played a major role, the Crusades were not purely a conflict between two faiths. The motivations were far more complex, blending religious zeal, political ambition, economic opportunity, and even the lust for adventure and conquest. Spiritually, Crusaders were driven by Christian devotion and the Pope's call to liberate the Holy Land from Muslim rule. Yet, many also joined the cause seeking land, wealth, or social prestige. Meanwhile, internal divisions within both the Crusaders and the Muslim world further complicated the wars. Among Muslims, sectarian conflicts between Sunni and Shia groups, along with rival dynasties, shaped the dynamics of the Crusades. And within the Crusader ranks, differing agendas often led to disunity and betrayal. If the Crusades were truly just a war of religion, they might have begun centuries earlier, during the time of the Umayyads, Abbasids, or Fatimids, who also ruled Jerusalem. Yet those caliphates generally maintained peaceful coexistence with Christians and Jews, allowing them to live and worship freely in exchange for attacks. Christian pilgrimages and trade routes to Jerusalem even benefited the Islamic economy at the time. But when the Seljuks seized control of Jerusalem, that fragile peace collapsed. Violence against Christian pilgrims increased, and hostility along the trade routes grew. At the same time, the Byzantine Empire, under Emperor Basil II, had expanded its territories through decades of conquest. Yet Basil's neglect of domestic affairs and failure to integrate new lands left the empire vulnerable. In 1071, the Battle of Manzikert became a devastating blow to Byzantium. The Seljuk Turks crushed the Byzantine army and seized much of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, triggering civil wars and economic collapse. Amid this chaos, General Alexios Komnenos seized power in 1081, proclaiming himself Emperor Alexios I Komnenos. To rebuild his empire and face the Turkish threat, he sought help from the West. In 1095, Emperor Alexios sent envoys to Pope Urban II, requesting Western mercenaries to help reclaim lost territories. This appeal, combined with growing concerns over pilgrim safety and the desire to retake the Holy Land, inspired Pope Urban II's call for the First Crusade. That same year, in November 1095, at the Council of Clermont in southern France, Pope Urban II urged Western Christians to take up arms, to aid Byzantium and reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. According to chronicler Robert the Monk, who wrote about 25 years later, Pope Urban declared that anyone who journeyed to Jerusalem not for wealth or glory, but purely out of devotion, could have their sins forgiven, their pilgrimage serving as penance for all wrongdoing. This call marked the beginning of the First Crusade, which would ignite 2 centuries of holy wars across the Mediterranean. Inspired by the Pope's words, nobles, knights, and even commoners across Europe answered the call. They sewed the symbol of the cross onto their garments, a mark of loyalty to the Church and a promise to liberate Jerusalem. Interestingly, from a theological perspective, Christianity at that time had no concept of a holy war. Warfare could be considered justified, but never sacred. Salvation could not be earned through combat. However, pilgrimage to the Holy Land was believed to bring spiritual merit. And Pope Urban II brilliantly combined these 2 ideas, transforming a military expedition into a sacred pilgrimage. And so, the First Crusade began, a journey that would reshape both the Christian and Muslim worlds for centuries to come. Four main Crusader armies were formed across Western Europe, led by prominent figures such as Raymond of St. Giles, Godfrey of Bouillon, Hugh of Vermandois, and Bohemond and Tancred of Taranto. In August of 1096, they began gathering their forces and marching toward Byzantium. Meanwhile, another group known as the People's Crusade, made up mostly of peasants and commoners, set out earlier under the leadership of Peter the Hermit. When Peter's army reached the outskirts of the Byzantine Empire, Emperor Alexios advised them to wait for the arrival of the Western nobles, whose armies would reinforce the campaign. But Peter's followers refused. Eager and undisciplined, they pushed forward, and were soon ambushed by the Seljuk Turks near the city of Nicaea. Out of tens of thousands, only about 3,000 managed to escape. At the same time, another group of crusaders led by Count Emicho carried out brutal massacres of Jewish communities across cities in the Rhineland in 1096, a dark chapter that created deep wounds between Jewish and Christian communities in Europe. When the four main Crusader armies finally reached Constantinople, Emperor Alexios demanded that their leaders swear oaths of loyalty to him, recognizing Byzantine authority over any territory they might conquer from the Turks, and even future conquests. Most agreed, but Bohemond refused. The Crusaders' first major battle came with the Siege of Antioch, which lasted from October 1097 to June 1098. After months of starvation and fierce fighting, they finally captured the city, only to face an immediate counterattack by a massive Muslim army led by Kurbaga of Mosul. Bohemond's forces managed to defeat Kurbaga, and what followed was a bloody massacre of the city's Muslim population in June 1098. After the victory, Bohemond stayed behind to secure control of Antioch, while the rest of the Crusader forces continued southward toward Jerusalem, conquering several towns along the way. The Crusaders reached Jerusalem on June 7, 1099. With the help of engineers from Genoa, they constructed 2 siege towers, catapults, and other siege engines to breach the city's walls. In July 1099, Godfrey of Bouillon ordered a full-scale night assault on what he believed to be the weakest section of Jerusalem's defenses. After a brutal siege, the Crusaders broke through on July 15, 1099, capturing the city. What followed was another massacre, with between 3,000 and 10,000 Muslim and Jewish inhabitants killed. A few weeks later, on August 12, 1099, Crusader forces under Godfrey defeated the Egyptian army at the Battle of Ascalon, securing their hold on Jerusalem and marking the end of the First Crusade. Godfrey was soon declared Advocatus Sancti Sepulchri, protector of the Holy Sepulchre, effectively becoming ruler of the new Kingdom of Jerusalem. To defend their conquests, the Crusaders established 4 Crusader states, known collectively as the Outremer, meaning lands beyond the sea. These included the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Tripoli, But peace did not last long. Internal rivalries and the rising unity among Muslim forces soon reignited the conflict, paving the way for the Second Crusade. In the year 1144, the city of Edessa faced a major assault led by Imad ad-Din Zengi, the ruler of the Seljuk Turks. This campaign was launched not only to reclaim Muslim territories but also as revenge for the massacres carried out by the Crusaders against Muslim populations. After capturing Edessa, Zengi and his forces unleashed a brutal slaughter upon the Christian inhabitants. Many were killed, taken captive, or enslaved. The fall of Edessa sent shockwaves through Europe and became the spark that ignited the Second Crusade, which lasted from 1147 to 1149. It was also tied to the broader events of the Reconquista in Spain and the Northern Crusades in the Baltic region. After Edessa's fall, Muslim forces began consolidating their power under the leadership of Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, Saladin, who would later go on to recapture Jerusalem for the Muslim world. In December 1145, Pope Eugene III issued the papal bull Quantum Predecessors, calling for a second crusade to restore Christian control over Edessa. This crusade was meant to be more organized than the first and was led by some of Europe's most powerful rulers, King Louis VII of France and Emperor Conrad III of Germany, joined by several princes and nobles. In May 1147, Conrad III and his army set out toward the Holy Land. However, during their passage through Byzantine territory, tensions arose with Emperor Manuel I Komnenos, leading to clashes near Constantinople. Conrad's army was defeated, forcing them to retreat toward the Bosphorus coast before continuing their march into Anatolia. Once in Anatolia, the Crusaders were ambushed by the Seljuk Turks under Sultan Mesud I at the Battle of Dorylaeum II on October 25, 1147. The attack was devastating. Conrad's army suffered heavy losses, nearly facing total annihilation. Meanwhile, Louis VII's French army departed in June 1147 and eventually joined the remnants of Conrad's forces in northern Turkey. After regrouping, they launched a counter-offensive and managed to win a victory against the Seljuks at the Battle of Ephesus on December 24, 1147. But the following year, in January 1148, the Crusaders were again defeated by Mesud's forces, suffering tremendous losses. Weakened by disease and exhaustion, they continued toward Antioch, their numbers greatly diminished. By March 19, 1148, the Crusaders finally reached Antioch, still hoping to reclaim Edessa, but their plans soon changed. Baldwin III of Jerusalem and the Knights Templar proposed a new strategy. Instead of Edessa, they would target Damascus, which had long been a Muslim stronghold. During the Council of Acre on June 24, 1148, the Crusader leaders agreed to this new plan. The siege of Damascus began on June 24 and lasted only 5 days, ending on June 28, 1148, with a disastrous defeat for the Crusaders. Poor planning, lack of coordination, and the timely intervention of Nur ad-Din, Zengi's son, helped secure Damascus's defense. A few years later, on June 29, 1149, Nur ad-Din defeated the Crusaders once more at the Battle of Inab, marking the collapse of the Second Crusade and the deepening divide among Christian forces. This failure would eventually lead to the fall of Jerusalem to Saladin in 1187, when Balian of Ibelin surrendered the city after the siege of Jerusalem on October 2. The loss of the Holy City sent Europe into shock, and soon, kings and emperors across Christendom would prepare for the Third Crusade, known as the Crusade of the Kings. After the failure of the Second Crusade, Pope Gregory VIII issued the papal bull Audita Tremendi on October 29, 1187, calling for the start of the Third Crusade. This crusade was led by three of the most powerful rulers in Europe: Emperor Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, King Richard I of England, also known as Richard the Lionheart, and King Philip II, Augustus of France. Its main goal: to reclaim Jerusalem from Saladin's control. Richard and his army set sail for Palestine by sea, while Frederick chose to march overland, beginning his journey in 1189. As Frederick's forces passed through Constantinople, they were ambushed by an alliance of Byzantine and Muslim troops, causing heavy losses. By March 1190, the emperor's army reached Anatolia, then controlled by the Seljuk Turks. On May 18, 1190, Frederick won a decisive victory against the Seljuks at the Battle of Iconium, seizing the region. But tragedy struck soon after. On June 10, Frederick drowned near Silifke Castle in the Gokshu River while crossing toward the Holy Land. His sudden death threw his army into chaos. Without their leader, panic spread. Many were slain by Turkish forces, and only a few survivors managed to escape, eventually reaching Acre, Palestine. Meanwhile, Richard the Lionheart arrived at Acre on June 8, 1191. He reorganized his troops and launched a siege, successfully capturing the city on July 12. Soon after, on August 20, Richard ordered the execution of 2,000 Muslim prisoners in what became known as the Massacre of Ayodhya. This act provoked Saladin's retaliation. He, in turn, ordered the mass execution of Christian captives in response. Both leaders mirrored one another's cruelty. Vengeance, it seemed, had replaced justice. Then came the Battle of Arsuf on September 7, 1191, one of the most famous clashes of the Crusades. Richard's army defeated Saladin's forces, securing much of the central Palestinian coast, including the port city of Jaffa. By September 12, Saladin disbanded most of his army to regroup, while Richard advanced about 12 miles toward Jerusalem, but soon realized he lacked the strength to lay siege. The Crusader army was divided. Hugh III of Burgundy and the Franks demanded an immediate attack on Jerusalem, while others insisted on withdrawing. Without unity, the Crusaders had no choice but to retreat to the coast. On July 27, 1192, Saladin's forces briefly recaptured Jaffa, but Richard quickly struck back from the sea, retaking the city and driving Saladin's troops away. Finally, on September 2, 1192, the two leaders agreed to peace, signing the Treaty of Jaffa. The terms were simple. Jerusalem would remain under Muslim control, but unarmed Christian pilgrims and merchants would be free to visit the Holy City without fear. Thus, the Treaty of Jaffa marked the end of the Third Crusade, a truce between two powerful leaders who, despite their wars, had come to respect one another's strength. And with that, the long and bloody struggle between Christian and Muslim armies finally came to a fragile pause, at least for a time. In the year 1197, 5 years later, Emperor Henry VI launched a new crusade known as the Crusade of 1197. However, while his army was on its way to Palestine, Henry VI died in Messina on September 28, 1197. The remaining nobles managed to seize parts of the Levantine coast between Tyre and Tripoli before returning to Germany. This crusade officially ended on July 1, 1198, after the Crusaders successfully recaptured key cities such as Sidon and Beirut. The Fourth Crusade took place between 1202 and 1204. It was a Latin Christian military campaign initiated by Pope Innocent III, whose main goal was to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. However, a series of economic and political events led to the Crusaders' diversion. First, the attack on Zara in 1202, and later, the sack of Constantinople in 1204. The sack of Constantinople caused the Byzantine Empire to fragment into three successor states: Nicaea, Trebizond, and Epirus. This event resulted in the Partitio Terrarum Imperii Romania, or the division of the Byzantine Empire by the Crusaders and their Venetian allies. This period came to be known as the Francocratia, a Greek term meaning "rule of the Franks." The Fourth Crusade significantly deepened the East-West Schism, the great divide between the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, and dealt a devastating blow to the Byzantine Empire. This contributed to its decline and eventual fall, while also increasing instability throughout the region. The sack of Constantinople and its aftermath, along with the loss of thousands of lives, left the area weakened and vulnerable to future invasions. Furthermore, the empire lost control over much of the Balkans, Anatolia, and surrounding islands, making it susceptible to attacks by small Turkish beyliks, which later united to form the Ottoman Sultanate that eventually conquered Constantinople. The Fifth Crusade, which took place between 1217 and 1221, continued the effort to reclaim Jerusalem and the rest of Palestine by targeting Egypt, which was then ruled by Sultan al-Adil, the brother of Saladin. Pope Honorius III organized the Crusader forces, led by King Andrew II of Hungary and Duke Leopold VI of Austria, in a campaign to retake Jerusalem. However, their attempt failed, and the city remained under Muslim control. In 1218, German forces under Oliver of Cologne, along with combined forces from the Netherlands, Flanders, and Frisia led by William I, Count of Holland, joined the crusade to attack Damietta in Egypt. In November 1219, they succeeded in capturing the port of Damietta and proceeded south toward Cairo in July 1221. However, they were forced to retreat due to supply shortages. At that time, Sultan al-Kamil of the Ayyubid dynasty launched a sudden counterattack and defeated the Crusaders at the Battle of Mansoura in August 1221. Although the Crusaders still held strong influence in Damietta, they proposed to withdraw from the city and agreed to an 8-year truce with the Sultan. As part of this agreement, both sides consented to allow safe passage for Crusader troops, release prisoners, and return the relic of the True Cross. Before Damietta was surrendered, both sides exchanged hostages, including John of Pren and Herman of Salza from the European side, and one of al-Kamil's sons from Egypt. The official handover of Damietta to Sultan al-Kamil took place on September 8, 1221, marking the end of the Fifth Crusade and failure for the Crusaders. The Sixth Crusade began in 1228 as another attempt to reclaim Jerusalem after the previous failure. This time, however, the focus shifted to diplomacy. Emperor Frederick II negotiated directly with Sultan al-Kamil, resulting in the Treaty of Jaffa on February 18, 1229. This agreement returned Jerusalem to Christian control, while allowing Muslim pilgrims to freely enter the city without interference from Christians. Through this treaty, the Sixth Crusade achieved victory, not through warfare, but through diplomacy, restoring Jerusalem to Christian rule. It set a significant precedent, proving that a crusade could succeed without direct papal involvement or massive bloodshed. In the year 1229, Emperor Frederick II and Sultan al-Kamil reached a 10-year truce. However, in 1234, Pope Gregory IX issued the papal bull Rachel Suavidens, calling for a new crusade, later known as the Barons' Crusade, following the expiration of that truce. Although several English and French nobles agreed to take part, the Crusade's departure was delayed because Frederick opposed launching another campaign before the truce had ended. As a result, Frederick was excommunicated in 1239, and most Crusader forces avoided passing through his territories on their way to Palestine. The French expedition was led by Theobald I of Navarre and Hugh of Burgundy. When Theobald finally arrived on September 1, 1239, he became involved in a civil conflict among the Ayyubids. Theobald decided to fortify Ascalon to protect the southern border of the kingdom, then advanced toward Damascus. However, when the Crusader forces moved from Acre toward Jaffa, they were confronted by Egyptian troops, leading to the Battle of Gaza. After the battle, Theobald managed to negotiate the return of Jerusalem, taking advantage of internal disputes among the Ayyubid rulers. Meanwhile, in July 1239, Baldwin of Courtenay set out for Constantinople with a small army. During the winter of that same year, he returned and was crowned emperor. Baldwin then launched his own crusade, successfully capturing several fortresses around Constantinople. Although the Barons' Crusade managed to expand Christian territories in Palestine, its success was short-lived. Jerusalem fell once again in 1244 during the siege and Battle of La Fourby, resulting in heavy losses for the Christian Crusaders. This defeat inspired King Louis IX of France to organize and launch the Seventh Crusade. The Seventh Crusade, fought between 1248 and 1254, was the first of two crusades personally led by Louis IX. His objective was to reclaim Palestine by invading Egypt, the center of Muslim power in the Middle East, which was then ruled by As-Salih Ayyub, son of al-Kamil. This crusade was launched in response to the decline of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which had begun with the loss of the Holy City in 1244. It was initiated by Pope Innocent IV alongside the Russian Crusade against Emperor Frederick II and the Mongol invasions. In 1244, Louis fell gravely ill with malaria. He vowed to go on a crusade if he recovered. When his health returned, he honored that vow and immediately began preparations. The following year, the Pope convened the First Council, authorizing the new crusade under Louis's leadership. When Rome came under siege by Frederick, The Pope issued Ad Apostolicae Dignitatis Apicem, officially reaffirming the emperor's excommunication and stripping him of his titles to the empire and Naples. Recruitment under Cardinals Odo and Eudes de Châteauroux proved difficult, but the crusade finally began on August 12, 1248, when Louis departed from Paris wearing the Pilgrim's Cross. He was accompanied by Queen Margaret of Provence, his two brothers, Charles I of Anjou and Robert I of Artois, and their younger sibling, Alphonse of Poitiers, along with numerous other nobles. At that time, as Salah Ayyub was campaigning in Damascus, expecting the Crusaders to land in Syria, he withdrew to Cairo to prepare his defenses. He ordered his vizier, Fahr ad-Din ibn as-Sheikh, to lead the Egyptian forces in protecting Damietta and anticipating an invasion. On June 5, 1249, the Crusader fleet began landing near Damietta. During the ensuing battle, the Egyptian commander decided to evacuate the city, allowing the Crusaders to capture Damietta with little resistance. Following the death of Sultan As-Salah Ayyub in November 1249, his wife, Shajar al-Dur, concealed the news and forged documents naming their son, Al-Muazzam Turanshah, as his heir. In December, Louis encamped along the opposite bank of the Nile near Mansoura. For 6 weeks, the Crusader and Egyptian armies faced each other across the canal, until the Battle of Mansoura on February 11, 1250, which initially ended in a Crusader victory. On February 28, Turanshah arrived from Damascus and launched a counterattack against the Franks, cutting off their supply lines from Damietta. This caused severe starvation and disease among Louis's forces. The Battle of Farisker, fought on April 6, 1250, ended in a crushing defeat for the Crusaders. Louis was captured and forced to surrender Damietta, paying a large ransom in exchange for his freedom. This marked the end of the Seventh Crusade. After the disastrous campaign in Egypt, Louis IX remained in Syria until 1254, working to strengthen the remaining Crusader states. However, the growing Mongol threat prompted Qutuz, a Mamluk leader, to seize power in 1259. Together with Baybars, he defeated the Mongols at the Battle of Ain Jalut. Baybars then captured Damascus and Aleppo before taking full control following Qutuz's death. Between 1265 and 1271, Baybars expelled the Franks from most of their coastal strongholds. His goal was to prevent an alliance between the Latin Christians and the Mongols while maintaining access to trade routes through the Russian steppes. During this period, conflicts among the Crusader states continued, including the War of St. Sabas. In 1270, Charles of Anjou organized the Eighth Crusade, launching an attack on Tunis for his own political and economic gain. However, the campaign failed when many Crusaders succumbed to disease, and King Louis IX himself died in Tunis on August 25. Finally, in 1291, the fall of Tripoli and the defeat at the Siege of Acre marked the end of Western Europe's presence in Palestine, and the conclusion of the Crusades aimed at reclaiming Jerusalem. The Crusades were ultimately a complete failure in establishing lasting Christian kingdoms in the Holy Land of Jerusalem. With the rise of the Ottoman Empire, the region remained firmly under Muslim control, as it largely still is today. The Crusades also brought enormous consequences to all sides involved. Beyond death, destruction, and suffering, these wars left behind deep political, economic, and social impacts that lasted for centuries. Moreover, the idea of the Crusade itself was later used as a religious justification for the conquest of the so-called New World during the 15th and 16th centuries. At the same time, the Crusades played a significant role in strengthening Europe's sense of identity and cultural unity. The shared mission to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim control inspired solidarity among Europe's many nations, who began to see themselves as part of a larger Christian community. However, this unity also came with darker consequences, such as the rise of xenophobia and hostility toward minorities like Jews and Muslims in Europe, effects that still echo even today. Despite these negatives, the development of military orders and chivalric traditions that emerged from the Crusades left a lasting mark. The ideals of chivalry, honor, and bravery became deeply embedded in European culture, shaping its social and military structures for generations. And though separated by time and distance, these interactions may have indirectly sparked Europe's awareness of the scientific and intellectual advancements flourishing in the Islamic world, in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Knowledge that would later enrich European thought and help lift the continent out of the Dark Ages, guiding it toward the Age of Enlightenment, the Renaissance. Thank you.